Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and I'm excited about tonight's guest, Grant Lavac. I had to pre-record with him because right now in Australia it is 11 o'clock on Wednesday, and there was no way he could get out of work, unfortunately. So it's a pre-recorded show with him, and I'm live right now, of course, just for a couple minutes here for a couple of announcements. And so he'll be on. He's a great guest. You're really going to enjoy him. A couple of things. The blog this week from Charles Lear is a general and a UFO hotspot in Brazil. Great blog, another great one by Charles Lear. I'm pretty excited to say that on the 30th, you're going to see myself with this gentleman right here. Hey, Tim.
Hey, brother.
Tim, Martin Willis from Podcast UFO.
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
Sure.
So Tim Burchett is going to be on. It may be a short interview. I'm not really sure how long it's going to be. Unfortunately, also, I have to pre-record with him because it's during the day. But that I'm going to pre-record with him on Thursday. It's going to be on the following week. So on the 30th, Tuesday the 30th, I'll have Dave from Spaced Out Radio as my guest. And Tim Burchett, the recording that I have with him will be played at that time. So I have a lot of questions for him about the hearing that just happened. Seems like a lot of positive things were said according to what I've seen from the interviews afterwards. So if you have any really good questions, you'd like to email me at martin@podcastufo.com. I'll see if I can ask them if it makes sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the recording that I did with Grant, and I'm going to be in chat. So if you're joining us live, you can interact in the chat room. And I'm going to get going right now. Thank you all for those of you who support the show. And thank all of you who listen to the show. I really appreciate it. And here we go. Grant, welcome to the show.
Martin, it's good to be with you. Thanks so much for having me on and give me an opportunity to share some perspectives and insights with your viewers. So it's good to be with you. Excellent.
You know, I have to say that whenever I look at the demographics to listeners to this show, it's the United States #1, and then between the UK and Australia, it's they go back and forth who's the second most listened to. Now you only have 26 million people in Australia, and
that's right,
and so many listeners. And what would you attribute that to?
Well, look, I think the Australian public has certainly a fascination and interest in this topic. Like, to the Australian mainstream media's credit, whenever something significant happens in the US, whether it's Congress or David Grush coming out with Ross Coulthard on News Nation, the Australian news media will cover it, but that's all they do. It's very copy and paste journalism. They don't ask questions of those in positions of leadership and authority in Australia, those in the Australian government. So whilst my gripe with the media is that they don't exercise their due diligence on the topic as frequently as they should, to their credit, they do cover it, and they do have folks that are well known to us in the community, like Jeremy Corbell, John Greenwald Jr. They have folks come on and provide some commentary on the US landscape. So I would put it down to the fact that, with everything that's happened in the last several years with the US, that information has flowed through to the Australian public.
I see. Now, I know you're a ufologist or UFO researcher, and we're going to talk a little bit about Westall and maybe a few other cases. But let's hear about who you are and what got you interested in the topic of UFOs to begin with.
Yeah, so I mean, I've had a fascination for this topic really ever since I was a young fella. I'm 45 years of age now, and in the mid 80s, when I was around about 6 or 7 or 8, I can't remember the exact year, but my father took me to a photo exhibition, a UFO photo exhibition that was being held at Australia's tallest skyscraper called Centrepoint Tower, which is kind of comparable with, I guess, the Space Needle in Seattle. Kind of looks pretty similar. And so there was this photo exhibition, which I found out only a few years ago that renowned Australian ufologist and researcher Bill Chalker was provided some consultancy in the organization of that photo exhibition. But coming back to the point that, in this photo exhibition, there are a lot of black and white photos blown up on canvas and displayed around the photo exhibition of these, famous sightings and cases over the decades past. And one of them was the black and white McMinnville photo from the 50s. And I've said this a number of times before, but I really just lost myself. Yeah, that's the one. Lost myself in that photo and just imagining what it would have been like to be in the shoes of the rancher or the farmer, to take that photo and see what happened before, during, and after the event. And then obviously growing up as a teenager in the 90s, I was a child of the X-Files. Wednesday night, 9 p.m. every week, you'd watch it. Then you have a big debrief with your schoolmates the next day. And then my interest kind of ebbed and flowed in the years thereafter. And for like so many folks, it wasn't really until the bombshell New York Times articles of December 2017 that really piqued my interest. And obviously then throughout COVID, so many of us were spending so much more time at home and not able, certainly for me in Melbourne, not able to get outside and enjoy the fresh air. I kind of just became a sponge on the topic, to the disinterest or distaste of my wife. And I've always said, marriage and the UFO topic does not always go hand in hand, but she's come to appreciate my interest. But, I just really became a sponge on the topic during COVID and trying to learn really as much as I could from as many as I could during that period. And, following, obviously, there was a 3-day live stream event in September of 2022 called the Big Phone Home, the Big Phone Home 2.
I was part of that, yes.
Yeah, right. And I remember seeing, it was, the time zone difference wasn't all that friendly for me, so I had to watch a lot of the stuff in the middle of the night. But that event really inspired me to get off my ass, rather than sit on the bench, to get in the game and not be a passive observer, but be an active participant and activate myself and engage my elected representatives on the topic to really see what Australia is doing about the UAP UFO topic. And sadly, Australia is doing very, very little. So that's kind of been my driving force for a number of years now, is to engage my elected representatives and members of the media to advocate that they take the topic more seriously and ask questions of those that are in positions of leadership and authority in Australia, because Australia is, the US's closest ally. I mean, we're the closest of allies, but we couldn't be further apart on the UAP issue. Australia pretty much is in lockstep with the US on every defense initiative, but it will not touch the UAP topic. And that's been a question that I've been puzzling to find an answer on for a number of years. And that's kind of where I am today, trying to dig for answers as to why Australia's been so lackluster on its interest for the topic.
I think that's so strange, just in the way that there is obviously so much public interest per capita. As I mentioned earlier, so many people listen to my show from there. So it really, I'm really surprised at that. And is there anything you can attribute that to?
Yeah, it's a good point, because not a lot of people know this, but Australia has almost as long as a history investigating the UAP UFO topic as the US does. Dating back to the early 1950s, in the years following Roswell, the Australian Air Force and the now defunct Department of Supply, there was a policy implemented. It was called a UAS policy. In Australia, it was referred to as unusual aerial sightings, as opposed to UAS, as opposed to UFOs, because there were a lot of UAS UFO sightings over sensitive military installations in Australia in the 1950s and the 1960s. And Ross Coulthart talks about these on a number of occasions in his book, In Plain Sight. You've got Woomera, you have Maralinga, where the Brits were permitted to detonate, I think, 5 nuclear blasts without telling the indigenous population. And there was a lot of anomalous activity observed and reported over these sensitive top secret military installations in the 50s and 60s. So there was a gentleman by the name of Harry Turner, who veteran researcher Bill Chalker has done a ton of work on, and I've had the good fortune of learning from Bill directly, and he's certainly been a great mentor for me. But Harry Turner he was an Australian nuclear scientist. He took a very keen interest in the UFO topic, and he was permitted to see the Australian Air Force's secret documents, reports of UFOs, and he took it upon himself to really start to investigate the topic from an Australian context, to the point where he even made a recommendation to the Joint Intelligence Organization, the JIO, and the Directorate of Air Force Intelligence, that they consider implementing a rapid intervention team, like a crash retrieval team. So Harry Turner was taking this topic very, very seriously, and unfortunately all of the recommendations that he made unfortunately fell on deaf ears, because the Air Force and Directorate of Air Force Intelligence and JAO, they caught wind of him supporting the work of Donald Kehoe, who had made some hypotheses that, well, perhaps UFOs are of an extraterrestrial origin. And the fact that Harry Turner just referenced Donald Kehoe's work or supported it in that fashion, his findings and all of his work was kind of brushed to the wayside, and his work fell on deaf ears, which was really unfortunate. Then essentially fast forward to 1993, where a policy recommendation change was submitted to the Chief of Air Staff, which is now known as the Chief of Air Force. And there was a recommendation made that the Royal Australian Air Force cease its ongoing investigation into UFOs, because it could not find any compelling or scientific or other compelling reason to continue to devote resources to the ongoing investigation of the topic. And sadly, that policy was implemented, that policy recommendation was implemented in 1996. And that's when the Royal Australian Air Force washed its hands and basically said, move along, folks, there's nothing to see here. So what is puzzling to me is that the Royal Australian Air Force and the Australian Department of Defence continues to bury its head in the sand on this topic, and basically toe the line of move along, folks, there's nothing to see here, and continue to reiterate the line that they've said in 1996, that there's no compelling or scientific reason for us to continue to devote resources. Well, the problem there is that the Australian Department of Defence and Royal Australian Air Force has not investigated reports of UFOs since 1996, up until May of this year, where Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick of AARO conducted the first ever Five Eyes Forum on UAP. Prior to May of this year, Australia had not had any engagement publicly that we're aware of with the United States on UFOs, UAP, and it had not been privy to any of the classified information housed within the classified reports provided to Congress by the ODNI. And there was this document that I was able to secure for release through the Freedom of Information Act in Australia, one of the most significant documents that's come out of the Australian Department of Defence in more than 30 years, that basically confirmed that the Royal Australian Air Force had a strategic narrative, specifically that UAP, UFOs must be one of three things. It made this determination without having done, investigated the topic, been exposed to classified info or engaged the US. They came to the conclusion that UAP are likely to be natural or other benign phenomena. That was the first. Number two, sensor errors with surveillance equipment. And three, human-made technologies, which could include foreign adversarial systems. There was no reference whatsoever in that Chief of Air Force brief on UAP that UAP could be anything other than those three things. There was no catch-all other bin that the ODNI indicated in its preliminary assessment on UAP back on the 25th of June 2021. So that's been a real sense of frustration for me, trying to understand why Australia, the US's closest ally, is so reluctant to acknowledge that a conversation needs to be had on UAP, that it should be investigated, and that a conclusion should be reached as to what UAP are. Because the US Department of Defense and Congress has reiterated time and time again that UAP pose a national security threat and safety of flight risk, and that UAP is not isolated to the United States or North America. It's an international issue. So why Australia continues to bury its head in the sand on the topic is completely perplexing. There's a couple of reasons why I think that is the case, that they're so reluctant, which I can speak to if you wish. But that kind of gives a bit of a brief history on Australia's past in terms of the UAP UFO topic.
Well, it's similar. You think about some of the things that happened in the United States as far as our Air Force. 1969, you flip the last two digits, 96, 69.
That's right.
But is when they concluded basically the same. However, going all the way back into 1947 was the first document that came out that said that, these are not imaginary, so our government has been aware of this and kind of acknowledges it, back and forth over the years, not so much until the last, year, when we have this, this hearing in DC. But, in 97, you're right, the bombshell article that hit the New York Times really did change so much, when you really think about it from my own personal level and that whole situation. It's like I felt finally comfortable enough to talk about it to people that normally I wouldn't. Where the topic has come up. I'm a fine art appraiser and I work in homes, a lot. And usually it's very affluent people that are having these appraisals. And, I am not so afraid to bring up the topic if it works, and it has a number of times. And, there's definitely the stigma has worn down quite a bit.
Well, you're right. I think, and that goes to, it's kind of safety in numbers now, isn't it? And strength in numbers, where so many more people have been exposed to this topic and see how seriously it's been taken. It's not about, the green little men anymore, that conversation, even though that's a huge part of it, David Grush's claims. And it's great that members of Congress are taking those allegations and claims seriously. But you're right. I was always very hesitant and reluctant to talk to friends, colleagues, family, or people I just met on the street about the topic out of fear of ridicule and stigma. And slowly, very, very slowly, those walls of stigma are starting to fall around this topic. And I've said this story a number of times. I'm originally from Sydney, live in Melbourne now in Australia, and I was traveling to Sydney a year or two ago, and I was doing some research on the Phoenix lights. I was reading a book by Dr. Lynn Kitai, and I was going through the security checkpoint screening with my, my carry-on baggage, and I had the book in my carry-on, and they screened my bag and they wanted to go through it, and the screener saw the book in my carry-on, and before you know it, we had dived into a whole conversation about the Phoenix lights and UAP UFOs, and we ended up having probably a conversation, a good 5 or 10 minutes in between him screening other bags. And it was just, there was no ridicule, there was no stigma attached to it. So I think people would be surprised as to how open others are in having a conversation on this topic, because of everything that's happened over the course of the last, 6-7 years.
And also another thing, when that topic comes up, I'm never surprised at how many people will say, "Oh yeah, well my uncle, had this, that type of thing happened back in 1970s or whatever." There's so many people that have had encounters. I forget. I read something recently where it's in the hundreds of thousands of encounters that have been reported. Now, granted, probably 5% of those are totally unexplained, but still, the old saying goes, you only need one.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
right. And they're the ones that we're interested about. It's not, Project Blue Book closed its doors with still, what was it, 2 or 3% of cases unresolved. And, that also echoes true with the Australian, Royal Australian Air Force's UAS policy. It closed its doors on investigating UFOs, as I mentioned, in 1996, despite the fact that it could not reach there was no ready explanation as to what about 3% of their cases were. So they're the 3% that we care about. It's those anomalous reports that we want. And this is kind of to echo what Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, now the former head of AARO, said when he testified before Kirsten Gillibrand's committee in April of last year.
Oh yeah.
His goal with AARO at the time was to get cases to a point where they could resolve it and turn it into an SEP, someone else's problem, and pass it on to someone else. But they're not the ones that we care about. We care about the 2-3% that are truly anomalous is the word I'm trying to get out, and we want to learn more about those cases. So, it's just amazing that it took as long as it did for AARO to get a public-facing website up and running, and to this date, there's not a whole lot of content on that website pertaining to cases that they have been able to resolve, and their lack of communication strategy is telling. I mean, they've had one post on social media on X since July of 2022, so I think they've really fallen short of meeting the general public's expectation of being as transparent as it could on the topic.
Well, when I don't know if they have I don't believe they have the permanent chair of AARO, Sean Kirkpatrick's permanent replacement there yet. But
no, they've only got an acting director, so I think that's Tim Phillips. I don't think they have appointed yet a full-time replacement. But hopefully, who knows what that new installed director will be? Hopefully, they'll be a little bit more ambitious and aggressive than Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick was, because I think he was very. Every time. I've never met the guy. I don't know him, but just from an observational perspective at face value, whenever he spoke, he sounded like he really didn't want to be there or talking about the topic. So hopefully the next person that comes along is going to be a little bit more proactive than reactive on the topic. Yeah.
I understand when he said, I've heard him say 2 or 3 times that he'll go wherever the evidence points him. And I think that's only fair, and that's the, a proper response. But I didn't see the ambition, and I saw a lot of more or less closed-mindedness, kind of rear its ugly head a few times. And, the statements he made about David Grush and things like that, were pretty negative and, not scientific to the point where, there wasn't an open mind, like it just can't, it can't be. That type of thing.
I agree. Yeah. And the he said, she said kind of scenario where, Grush is saying that no, he'd never received any calls or meetings from AARO and Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, and then Dr. Kirkpatrick is refuting that. So the whole back and forth, and the fact that Kirsten Gillibrand was trying to get David Grush and Sean Kirkpatrick to get together and have a conversation. That didn't happen, and the challenges that Kirsten Gillibrand herself had trying to get a sit-down face-to-face with David Grush, the whole debacle over trying to, not paying for travel and lodging fees to get him to Washington, D.C. was ridiculous. So, I think I'm hoping that the next person that comes along with AARO, is someone that we can look to really, be a bit more aggressive and proactive and take a more open, skeptical yet open tone and follow the facts wherever they lead, follow the data, not just select data, but follow all of the data wherever it leads.
Yeah. So. And for him, one of the announcements that I heard him make was when someone questioned him about the Tic Tac UFO incident back in 2004 off of, I'm trying to think of the name of the island out there in California.
Catalina, yeah.
Yeah.
Catalina way.
Right. So when they asked him about that, and I was really shocked that his reply was, no, we have all the data. Matter of fact, you have all the data. You see everything on YouTube. That's all the data we have for that. And is BS.
Yeah, complete BS.
Someone went on board the Princeton and took not of the Princeton, on the Nimitz, I guess it was, and took the Hawkeye's radar data bricks. Yep. So those data bricks went somewhere, and that's some major data that they actually do have on that. And so that is living somewhere, and someone has that, and he can't be unaware of that, I don't think. If he's
exactly, I mean, all you need to do is listen to the testimony and what Kevin Day has said, PJ Hughes, Gary Voorhees, all of the additional sensor data that was collected on the Nimitz incident, and it wasn't just on that day; it was 10 days leading up to that event where David Fravor and Alex Dietrich had the encounter, and then obviously the famous Tic Tac footage was taken shortly thereafter. So for Sean Kirkpatrick to come out and say that there's no additional data available is completely disingenuous. And I mean, is it possible that data no longer exists, has been destroyed? Possibly, but to say that no other data was ever available on the Tic Tac, the Nimitz incident is completely disingenuous.
Yeah, I mean, you think of all the cases that did have information, footage, or radar data or whatever like that. The Big Sur incident years ago, where that missile was firing at, a dummy warhead, that type of thing, going all the way back to Gordon Cooper's, the footage on the air base there that they had.
Vandenberg, and never saw that footage ever again. Those tapes have never been returned, or where have they gone?
Yeah, it makes you wonder where do they go, and maybe that is a possibility that things are destroyed. I mean, for what reason I would have no idea, but for deniability, I guess it could be.
Plausible deniability. I think that's probably a big part of it. I think that's a big part of why those in positions of leadership and authority in Australia, like the Australian Minister for Defence, like the Chief of Air Force, those guys, to my knowledge, have not yet even been briefed on UAP. And is plausible deniability an element of that? Possibly. I mean, the thing that I was able to break, before the end of last year was that, and this just kind of gives you some background information on the back and forth and the hypocrisy in Australia. So on the 15th of February of 2023, so last year, obviously in February of last year, for your viewers, you remember that's when the Chinese spy balloon thing happened, and the 3 unidentified aerial objects were shot down. So the 15th of February, 2023, the Chief of Air Force was pressed by Senator Peter Whish-Wilson, who's the Greens senator for Tasmania. And sadly, he's the only Australian senator to date that has taken this topic seriously in Australian context and had the courage and gumption to ask questions about UAP in Parliament. And so he has, dating back to October of 2021, he's been on a mission to really better understand why, like me, the Australian Department of Defence is so hesitant and reluctant to acknowledge the UAP topic and take it more seriously, secure briefings from the United States and so on. So 15th of February last year, Senator Whish-Wilson pressed the Chief of Air Force, current Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Robert Chipman, on the Chinese spy balloon incident and those 3 unidentified aerial objects. And the Chief of Air Force testified that he, as the head of the Air Force, had sought information and a briefing from the air attaché to the United States in Washington, D.C. on those shoot-down events. And Senator Wish Wilson asked the Chief of Air Force, well, why did you seek a briefing on those 4 events specifically? And the Chief of Air Force's response was, well, we wanted to better understand the intent, the source of those objects, and more importantly, see what learnings we could gain from the US Department of Defense's responses to those incidents, which the US Department of Defense has reiterated time and time again. They were shot down, or even President Biden said this, that the Chinese spy balloon was brought down because of the national security risk, and those 3 unidentified aerial objects were brought down because of a safety of flight risk. Now, rewind the clock back to the 25th of June 2021, ODNI's preliminary assessment on UAP, and it states that UAP clearly pose a safety of flight risk and pose a potential national security risk. And that was reiterated and echoed by Representative Ogle's questioning of David Grush, Ryan Graves, and David Fravor in July of last year at the congressional hearing, that UAP clearly pose a national security threat. Well, why is the Australian Department of Defence, or the Royal Australian Air Force, courtesy of the Chief of Air Force, why is it seeking a briefing and information on the shoot down of the Chinese spy balloon and those 3 unidentified aerial objects, which clearly represent a national security threat and safety of flight risk, yet it won't seek a briefing from the United States on UAP, which represent exactly the same threat, safety of flight and national security threat. And it was only in, it was in July of last year, the 19th of July, that the Australian Department of Defence responded to a question on notice, a written question that Senator Wish Wilson had submitted in June of last year, asking, well, did Australia attend the inaugural Five Eyes Forum on UAP led by AARO in May 2023? And the response that came back from the Department of Defense was Australia did not attend a United States briefing on UAPs. And that's a verbatim quote. Fast forward to the 15th of December of only last year, and the Australian Department of Defense responded to a follow-up, a number of follow-up questions on notice that Senator Wish Wilson had submitted, I believe on the 2nd of November. And the response was, the question was, did the Australian Department of Defence receive an invitation from AARO to attend the Five Eyes Forum on UAP in May 2023? And that's a paraphrasing of the question. The response that came back to that question was yes, in that it did receive an invitation. And the response was a defence representative based at the Australian Embassy in Washington, D.C., attended. So why those contradicting statements? There's a complete 180. Why basically the lie back in July of 2023 and an about face in December of last year? So one of 2 things is happening. There is some pure deception being played by the Australian Department of Defence. They've lied to a sitting senator and Australian taxpayers, and or there is some catastrophic incompetence taking place where the Australian Department of Defence is not exercising its due diligence to find out, well, did we even attend the Five Eyes Forum on UAP? Did they do the homework and search and go for answers to that question? And I think it's a combination of the 2, which doesn't really instill a lot of confidence in a sitting senator like Senator Wish Wilson going forward, that their questions, and basically he's a member, Senator Wish Wilson's a member of the Senate Estimates Committee for Defense, Foreign Affairs and Trade, comparable with kind of like the House Oversight Committee in the US. It scrutinizes taxpayers' dollars where they're being spent on government projects. So it doesn't really instill a whole lot of confidence in Senator Wish Wilson and other senators going forward that their questions are going to be taken seriously and that there'll be a degree of due diligence exercised by the Department of Defense to find answers to the questions that they're asking on behalf of their constituents. So I suspect Senator Wish Wilson is going to have some rather pointed and pertinent questions for the Australian Department of Defence at the next Senate estimates, which is next month in February, to get to the bottom of why that significant discrepancy, why that deception, why that lack of due diligence to answer the Senator's questions back in July as opposed to doing a backflip in December of last year. So there are two things that are of big concern in an Australian context.
Wow. There's a lot of similarities here. It seems like, has been a lot of double talk. And I've often pondered, and it's only an opinion, I have no evidence to back it up of any kind at all, but I've always thought that our government probably knows a lot more than they're sharing, but they don't know everything. And I wondered, I think there's still one of the reasons that the Air Force has not really gotten too involved at all, our Air Force.
Where's the Air Force?
Is because they can't really tell us exactly what they are. I believe, it's all speculation. I wondered if you felt a similar feeling about your government as far as they may know more than they're letting you know.
Yeah, well, 100%. I suspect that the Australian intelligence community knows a hell of a lot more than the Australian Department of Defence does. So the Australian Defence Force Services, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and Defence Space Command, which now no longer falls under the remit of the Royal Australian Air Force. It's now Joint Operations Command. But the Defence Services, those four that I just mentioned, I suspect they know not nearly as much as the intelligence community in Australia. We're talking about the Australian Signals Directorate. We're talking about the National Geospatial Organisation, or the equivalent of the NGA in the States. You've got ASIS. You've got the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, ASIO. You've got the Office of National Intelligence, ONI, and you've got the Defence Intelligence Organisation. I suspect those intelligence community bodies know a hell of a lot more on the UAP UFO topic than we, the Australian general public, know about. And that's what I'm trying to seek clarification and confirmation of is, well, what does the not just the Australian Department of Defence know, but what does our Australian intelligence community know about UAP? Sadly, that's going to be a very hard question to get an answer to, because all of the intelligence communities in Australia are exempt from FOIA, exempt from Freedom of Information Act. So, as a private citizen, I'm never going to get any information out of those intelligence community services. However, a sitting senator that has the appropriate clearances to hear classified information, like the likes of perhaps a Senator Whish-Wilson and others that are on the Senate estimates for Defence, Foreign Affairs and Trade, well, they can ask questions, and they may be able to have those questions answered in a classified setting. So it's important that folks that need to know, that are in positions of leadership and authority, are afforded that information. And if the intelligence community knows more than it is shared with the Australian public, then it's imperative that our elected representatives that have those clearances are provided that information as well.
Right. We have,
and this is very similar to what's going on in the US at the moment. I mean, not to cut you off, but obviously, we've just had the House Oversight Committee, 16 members of that committee attend a SCIF meeting with the Inspector General for the intelligence community, and a lot of them have come out of that hearing sounding somewhat more, taking a more serious tone in how they felt that hearing went compared to the last SCIF meeting they had with the Inspector General for the DOD. So it sounds like, if you just look at what Representative or Jared Moskovich came out of that SCIF hearing and posted on X, or put a tweet out saying that he basically now believes or feels that, what was his quote? He said, Jared Moskovich's quote was, based on what we heard, many of Grush's claims have merit. So it's good to see that it sounds like those members that attended, of that House Oversight Committee that attended the SCIF, have reached a greater level of assurance, knowing that the claims that Grush has made deemed, is the reasons why the Inspector General deemed those, the complaint as urgent and credible. And it sounds like, that they've got a course of action that they want to pursue going forward. I mean, you just look at what Anna Paulina Luna has put out, basically saying, I feel confident that we have enough evidence to move forward with our field hearing. We will be announcing more soon. So it sounds like members of the House Oversight Committee have, whilst not all their questions were answered, because obviously they don't have all the appropriate clearances to hear everything that's classified that the Inspector General is aware of pertaining to David Grush's claims. It sounds like they're now, they have a plan of attack to continue to move the needle forward and get to the bottom of really what's going on. And it's just so frustrating that, July of last year, David Grush testified before the House Oversight Committee in Congress. And to this date, they still not have been afforded the appropriate clearances, even if it's just a one-time read-in, to hear David Grush's testimony, classified testimony, in a SCIF as it pertains to waste, fraud, and abuse. And that's exactly what the House Oversight Committee is charged with. Its mission is to expose waste, fraud, and abuse and mitigate the potential for waste, fraud, and abuse going forward. And how can it exercise oversight when it is not allowed to see the classified information that David Grush has indicated that he is he's aware of? It's just crazy that there's this stonewalling going on in the US by the intelligence community and those in US DOD that are just hampering efforts for House Oversight Committee to do to fulfill its congressional mandate.
Right. Well, there was just a closed UAP meeting for the House. Let's see, House members.
Yep.
So
I think 16 of them
not
attended.
really a lot
That's
of
a pretty good
information.
turnout.
What's that?
And from all accounts, 16, so about 34% of the entire House Oversight Committee, 16 members attended that SCIF meeting conducted by, I think it's the Inspector General Monheim for the intelligence community. So you've got you've got a turnout, more of a turnout at the SCIF meeting than those that attended the House Oversight Committee hearing in July of last year. So that should tell you something in itself.
Right. So I think we should shift gears. This has been really fascinating, but I'd like to talk about some Australian cases. And I know you've done a lot of work. I've had Shane Ryan on a number of times on this show. Great guy. I know that you know him. The Westall 1966, I want to say, is when that happened.
6th of April, 1966.
Would you say that's basically Australia's Roswell? Or
yeah,
what?
I would say it's Australia's Roswell and it's Australia's Ariel School.
Yeah, so that is, I understand that. Yeah, that's a good connection.
It's a fascinating case, and coming into trying to be a sponge and learn as much as I could on this topic from as many as I could. I didn't really know a whole lot about the Westall incident. Coming into it, I mean, I'd heard of it. I knew the background information, but it wasn't until I saw a few people had suggested I maybe look into it. I watched a wonderful documentary that Shane Ryan, who's really been the lead investigator researcher on Westall for more than a decade now, for many, many years. There are other great researchers that have done some wonderful work on Westall, Keith Basterfield, Bill Chalker, Ross Coulthart as well. But Shane Ryan has really carried the torch to continue to try and uncover information on the Westall incident. And so I reached out to Shane Ryan just to kind of pick his brain and get some good background information from him. And he suggested to me, he told me about an annual reunion event that a small number of the Westall incident witnesses, the Westall witnesses, kind of put together and attend each year. And obviously over COVID, there was a bit of a hiatus on that reunion event. But Shane Ryan told me about a reunion event that they had planned for, and this is going back in April of last year. And I thought, oh wow, well I'll just go along as a member of the general public and would love to hear what they have to say. And so I took, I went along. I took my little iPhone with me, thinking maybe I'll get a couple of comments on camera. And before I knew it, there was quite a decent turnout of other members of the general public that were curious like I was. And I was just fascinated to hear what these primary witnesses had to recount, the stories that they had to share, their recollections. And many of them were very, very giving, and all of them actually were very generous and giving of their time. And they accepted they were willing to go on camera. So I just, had my iPhone with me, put that on record, and just asked. I felt bad because I was kind of, gunning them with tons of questions, but I was able to get all of this wonderful commentary and testimony from these primary witnesses, which they'd kind of shared before in Shane Ryan's great documentary, Westall 66, a suburban UFO mystery, a really good introduction for anyone that doesn't know much about the Westall case. It's a great documentary. It was also obviously covered by James Fox's great documentary, The Phenomenon, a number of years ago, 2020. So, I captured a lot of footage of these primary witnesses just talking about their recollections of the day, their memories, and they were all willing to go on camera. So I had quite a number of hours of footage that I was able to then edit and compile down into about almost a 90-minute mini documentary, kind of like just a long form format of them answering questions and talking about their experience. And I found them all to be incredibly compelling. The one thing that is very frustrating that I gathered from all of them is that 58 years after the incident, which happened on the 6th of April 1966, they're also still very frustrated that they were told on the day and in the days following to shut up about it. They weren't allowed to talk about the incident. Why? Why weren't they allowed to talk about it? If it was something as prosaic as a weather balloon or a high-bow balloon, a high-altitude balloon, which there were launchings from Mildura in north of west of Victoria, where they conducted in coordination with the Department of Energy in the United States and even NASA. They used these high altitude balloons to conduct scientific testing, atmospheric testing, even try and smell remnants of, detect radioactivity in the air following detonation of nuclear blasts in the Pacific region, in the Pacific. And so there was a hypothesis put forward by great researcher Keith Basterfield that high-bow should be considered as a plausible explanation. And I'm respectful, respect the great work that Keith did to put that forward as a hypothesis. And that's all he positioned it as, a hypothesis. He doesn't know what it is, if it was or wasn't, but that was a hypothesis. But the thing that's so frustrating is that 58 years after the Westall incident, to date, no official record or explanation has ever been provided by the Australian federal government, state government, or local governments. There's been no official documentation on the Westall incident at all that has seen the light of day, despite the fact, and Ross Coulthard has said this a number of times, along with Shane Ryan, despite the fact that the now defunct Department of Supply was more than rumored, it was confirmed that they investigated the Westall incident fairly comprehensively and compiled a fairly significant report. Now, that report on the Westall incident by the Department of Supply has never seen the light of day. If it was so prosaic, and if it was, say it was high-bow or some top secret technology back in the 60s, well, that technology is obviously rudimentary now and is no longer of top secret nature. So why not release information pertaining to what it was if it was prosaic? There's been no documentation or ever any record provided by any government agency, and that's been part of the frustration. But if you talk to those primary witnesses, and even if you watch them on The Phenomenon, Westall 66, or even the documentary that I did, many of them are pretty much adamant in the fact that they saw something that resembled a flying saucer. It resembled the shape of a flying saucer. One of the witnesses said it almost looked translucent in nature. It moved in ways that some of them could not explain or reconcile with, technology that they would have seen. Light aircraft which flew over the school repeatedly. Moorabbin Airport was only a couple of kilometers away, so you're clearly able to hear and identify light aircraft flying over the school. And the alleged landing site area, the Grange, which was about a mile south of the school, and you would be able to identify, other prosaic objects like weather balloons, like hot air balloons, which the children knew what those objects looked like, but they weren't able to reconcile what this was that they saw above the skies, in the skies above their school, and that was reported to have descended or even landed in this densely wooded area known as the Grange, about a mile south of the school. So what the Westall incident, what can be attributed to what they saw on the 6th of April 1966 above their school in Westall at the Grange, I don't know. I wasn't there, but I certainly find their testimony incredibly compelling, and the fact that there's complete lack of any documentary evidence 58 years after, that makes it an enduring mystery and one of those long-standing cold cases.
Yes, yeah, that's really. There's so many puzzles, and I know that I believe this was the incident where the girl was kind of whisked away and not seen, but they had been able to locate her. Is that true?
Yeah, so her name was Tanya Vassie, and she was actually brought forward by Ross Coulthard only a few years ago. So she came forward. There were reports that she was whisked away. She was taken away in an ambulance, and then she left the school abruptly, and no one ever heard from her again. I think that account has been disputed since obviously the documentary. So I don't know the truth behind those claims, but she certainly came forward only a few years ago and spoke briefly about her recollections of the day. But what is also incredibly interesting is that you had reports from several of the primary witnesses of a military presence on site at the school in a very short time after the anomalous object, or objects, because some indicated that up to 3 objects were seen, not just the one, that there was a military presence on site after it happened and for a number of days, and that there were even some folks that appeared to be military officials or even government officials that were telling people to shut up about it. I mean, you had one of the children, I believe it was Tanya Vassie, I can't quite recall, but she was taken into a room in the school, and she was asked questions by 2 folks in suits, which she stated one of them she was able to identify had a distinct American accent. So why is an American on site investigating a prosaic sighting? And you had
not surprising at all.
No, well, there you go. And you've got but then also it wasn't just children that observed the flying saucer or flying saucers. You had a young teacher by the name of Andrew Greenwood, who was 20 years of age on the day of the incident, and he also came forward only a couple of years ago on a documentary that Ross Coulthard did on the Westall incident, and he has stated that only a day or a few days after the incident, he had some folks in military uniforms come knocking on his door at his house, unsolicited, uninvited. Asking him to not, telling him to shut up, not talk about the incident, because if he did, it would be very easy for people to then come to the conclusion that he was drunk on the day of the incident, and that he was an alcoholic. So they basically given him this veiled threat that if you talk about it, you're going to lose your job and no one's going to take you seriously going forward.
Yeah, hang on just 1 minute. Just 1 second here. First of all, is that documentary available?
It is, yeah. So it was done by, so Ross Coulthard has done a couple of documentaries.
Sorry. I apologize. I mean the one that you did.
Oh, yes. No, certainly. So it's called The Westall Witnesses, and
it's on YouTube?
on my YouTube channel. If you just type into YouTube my name or The Unexplained Rundown, which is the name of my podcast, one of the videos you'll find there is called The Westall Witnesses. All right.
I will put that. I'll link that in the show notes as well as below this YouTube and this video. What I'd like to do right now is say goodbye to everyone at KGRA Radio. We'll see you next week, and we'll continue on a little longer. I have Dr. Job Safa on next week for a guest. So let's continue on a little longer, if you don't mind, because again, thank you all at KGRA Radio. And so to continue on, I'd like to ask you about, as far as this case, there's really been nothing relevant except for that teacher finally talking about it and coming forward. And was this also the case where they took the camera from someone, or they took film or something out of a camera?
Yeah, so it was also alleged that another teacher by the name of, I can't remember her name, but there was another teacher that was alleged to have taken photographs on a camera during the incident, but like any good UFO case, that camera was confiscated. If the allegation is to be believed to be true, that camera was confiscated, and that photographic evidence has also never seen the light of day. So there is, if and to go one step further, the Channel 9, which is one of our legacy news medias in Australia, they were on site on the school in the afternoon that day. A journalist was on site with a cameraman, and they were interviewing a number of the children. And that night on the news, they aired their story of what the children had seen that day at Westall High School, and that broadcast has also disappeared since the broadcast on the night of the 6th of April, 1966. Now, Shane Ryan is of the belief that it's quite possible that that broadcast was simply destroyed in accordance with retention policies years past. But you would think something that is potentially so significant, because there were some articles in the local newspapers in the days following the Westall incident on the sighting, on the incident itself. But to your question, the alleged photographic evidence that was taken on a camera by one of the other teachers that was confiscated, again, never seen the light of day. So another piece of the puzzle that makes it just an enduring mystery.
Do you recall if any of the witnesses had any other sightings along the way? Did any of them talk about them having other things in their lives, happen since that time?
It's a good question. No, I didn't ask that question. I only asked them specifically about their recollections on that day, the 6th of April, 1966. I wouldn't be able to tell you either way if they've had any other experiences pre or post that day. But they were all. There are those that were there on the day of the reunion event that I was able to get on camera. On the day of the incident, most of the children were, 12, 13 years of age. There was, but it wasn't all school children that saw the object above the Westall High School. It was also Andrew Greenwood, as I mentioned, the teacher. And there was also Paul Smith, who was a 16-year-old working in the market gardens that were adjacent to the Grange area, this wooded area where it was alleged to have descended or landed or hovered on the ground. He was 16 years of age on the day of the sighting, and and he was not associated with the school children. And then there are other witnesses that were off-site, not on the school, not in the market gardens, that also saw something, in the sky above Westall High School. One of the primary witnesses I spoke to on the day, her name was Dee Sadake. She was a student. She was about 12, 13 years of age on the day of the incident. She was at a school that was several miles away from Westall High School, and during her recess break, she looked up in the skies and she saw something anomalous that resembled a flying saucer. She saw it was clearly a flying saucer when it banked and kind of turned on its side to move. So she wasn't even at Westall High School and she saw something. So it's not just isolated to the children and these small number of teachers at Westall High School. You've got corroborative evidence from a number of different folks from different backgrounds, different ages, that saw something on the day. And, to date, to Shane Ryan's credit, he has now interviewed and uncovered, I believe he spoke with up to 180 witnesses of the Westall incident. And so, he's done a remarkable job to bring forward so many people, more than just the handful of school children that were willing to come out early on and talk about what they saw. So there is, over time, more and more people, I think, maybe feel more comfortable to talk about what it is they saw on the day. And hopefully that continues to happen as well. So
now, did anyone go where this thing either hovered or landed in the Grange and try to, get to see if there's any type of trace evidence?
Yeah, so it was reported that there were 3 students. I can't remember their names, but it is covered in the Phenomenon, Ross Coulthard's documentary on 7 Spotlight, and Westall 66 that Shane Ryan did, that there were 3 school children that ran to the Grange area where this object was reported to have seen descending or hovered. One of the girls reported seeing it had landed in the Grange, and then it kind of banked on an angle and just shot up at a incredible rate of speed. What is interesting is that on the day of the reunion event, April of last year, the primary witnesses that took place at the Grange, they took those members of the general public, including myself that were there on the day. We all walked to the alleged landing site. So it's a clearing at the southeast corner of the Grange. And it was reported that there was, and they say this in the documentary I did, that they saw a symmetrical circle, an imprint of flattened grass where this craft was alleged to have hovered or landed. So, and then you have reports from some folks that military were on site in the day, later the day and the days following in that area with Geiger counters, with metal detectors, that soil samples were dug up and taken off site. Why would you need to do that if it was something that was prosaic in nature, other than if it was some, top secret technology that was being used to detect atmospheric conditions on a high bow that crashed and they didn't want anyone to retrieve it? Maybe, I don't know, but that seems less plausible to me based on the fact that you would think school children and a 16-year-old market gardener would be able to discern a deflating high bow balloon and it's really hard for people to appreciate the environment unless they're actually there on site. Having been now on site at the school and at the Grange and see how low light aircraft fly above you, it's implausible for me to think that children would not have been able to identify it as a deflating balloon. If it did descend towards the Grange, well, it's coming towards the ground. Paul Smith would have seen, I believe he would have seen and been able to identify it as a balloon. And he has said categorically, when I asked him the question, Some have said that it's a high bell. He says, no, it wasn't a balloon. It certainly wasn't a balloon. So, but yes, to your question, there was rumored, alleged to be trace evidence. This imprint in the flattened grass. Soil samples were taken. That area was closed off for a number of days. And you even had reports of, and this is what I tried to cover off in my little documentary, is that parallel to the southeast corner of the Grange, where this alleged landing site is, there's a golf course called the Spring Valley Golf Club. And that golf course has not changed all that much significantly since 1966. So I wanted to know, well, and it was reported, and Shane Ryan has reported this, he got in touch with the son of a groundskeeper who was working at the golf course on the day of the incident. And the groundskeeper's son reported to Shane Ryan that, when his dad came home that day, he was told that there were a number of golfers on the 8th hole that observed something in the skies descending towards the Grange. And it was anomalous to them. They weren't able to identify what it was. So I was very curious to see, well, what was the perspective that these golfers what would they have potentially seen through their eyes? What would their point of view or perspective been on the day, the 6th of April, 1966? So I booked myself in for a round of golf, paid through the arse for a round, but I was able to film from the eighth hole, from the fairway and the green, what the perspective would have looked like by golfers that were putting or playing the short game towards the end of the 8th hole, to see what it may have looked like through their eyes on the day, seeing something anomalous descend into the densely wooded area known as the Grange. So I covered that element in my documentary, which had never really been touched on before. So just another added piece of the puzzle, I guess.
That's interesting. So for the person out there that's listening or watching, and is not familiar with the Westall UFO incident, I will put a link to that. So an overall Wikipedia or something in the show notes. So you'll be able to read up on that and get more information. It's a very, very interesting. I think there were hundreds or well over 100 witnesses back in 1966 in the Melbourne area at the Westall School. So yeah, it's a great case. What would you consider another one of your favorites that you've looked into that happened in your country?
So there's another case that I haven't done a lot of homework on myself, but I know someone who has, George Simpson, who's another researcher in Australia. He authored a wonderful book called Nothing on Radar. So it's the Frederick Valentich case of the late 1970s, where sadly he lost his life. His light plane, he encountered something that was anomalous to him. He couldn't reconcile what it was. And a lot of the commentary was caught between him and air traffic control was recorded. Unfortunately, the actual recordings have never been located. They may have been destroyed. There's a transcript that I was made aware of that was put into a recreation using the transcript. But that's a fascinating case where you've got someone that's a general aviation pilot that has seen something anomalous that has engaged his aircraft, and unfortunately, Frederick Valentich lost his life, and that's been another case that has never been resolved. So that still remains an enduring cold case mystery as well. I am yet to read George Simpson's book, Nothing on Radar, but from what I've heard, it's a great recount of that incident.
Yeah, that is such a mystery. And, there's the noise. I believe James Fox told me that he actually at one time heard the original recording, I believe, if that's possible, many years ago, yeah. and that's gone. But that there's a lot of reenactments. You can find that out if you're looking on YouTube. They have reenactments of the transcript of what happened that day. But yeah, that's.
I mean, one of the cases that I covered on my channel that I'm a big Kurt Russell fan. For those out
Oh,
there that know
yes.
Kurt
Yeah.
Russell, and I've taken a big interest in the Phoenix Lights of March of 1997. And for those that follow and know the Phoenix Lights incident, it was in 2017 when Kurt Russell was promoting Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 on the BBC's The One Show, that he came out and he revealed to the world that he was the general aviation pilot that reported to air traffic control at Sky Harbor International, that he was the pilot that reported observing the Phoenix Lights on approach to the airport. And I found that to be incredibly fascinating. Then it was a year later in 2018, he then went on the Jimmy Kimmel Show and talked again about his encounter with his son, Oliver Hudson, seeing the Phoenix Lights. And Kurt Russell and his family seem to have quite an interesting connection with the UFO topic, because Goldie Hawn has, Kurt Russell's longtime partner, has had her own experiences with the phenomenon. And even Kurt Russell's son, Wyatt Russell, has seen a UFO. So I don't know if it runs in the family, but I did a bit of a deep dive of Kurt Russell's account or sighting of the Phoenix Lights, and was able to actually uncover some new information that had never been reported before publicly. Is that I was able to track down the owner of the aircraft, the light aircraft, a single prop propeller engine plane that Kurt flew to Phoenix on the night of the 13th of March, 1997. And for anyone that's a Kurt Russell fan out there, this is a bit of a spoiler, but Kurt Russell did a film in 1996 called Executive Decision, where he is at the front end of the film. He's learning how to become a general aviation pilot. So he's doing one of his last flights with an instructor before he does his solo flight. And if you listen to what Kurt Russell says in that interview on the BBC's The One program in 2017, he says three words. He basically says, I was the tail sign of the plane was 2 Tango Sierra, and I was the pilot. And I knew I had heard the words 2 Tango Sierra before. So I consulted the Oracle, my Kurt Russell DVD collection, and at the front end of Executive Decision 1996, there is a scene where Kurt Russell's character, David Grant, is doing one of his last flights before his solo flight, and he's coming into land. He's on approach, and in the film, he says his call sign of 2 Tango Sierra to air traffic control, the exact same call sign that he revealed in that interview on the BBC's One Show. And I was able to confirm that the plane that he flew in the film Executive Decision was the exact plane that he flew to Phoenix on the 13th of March, 1907. And I know that to be the case because I was able to track down the owner of that plane, 2 Tango Sierra. His name was John Rexy Moore. And as a fun fact, he was actually the flight instructor in that scene with Kurt Russell in Executive Decision. He's good friends with Kurt Russell, and it was his plane that was used in the film that Kurt Russell also flew to Phoenix when he saw the Phoenix Lights. So talk about some synchronicities there, but I just found that to be an interesting side story.
Yeah, and if it wasn't for Goldie Hawn, he would have never recalled that whole incident. She was watching something on the Phoenix Lights, I believe, and that's what jogged his memory. Like, oh yeah, I was there about the same time, and when he looked in his logbook, he figured out it was March.
Isn't it interesting that Kurt and Oliver Hudson never spoke about what they saw the Phoenix Lights after it happened? And you hear that time and time with a lot of other people, they kind of just forget about it and get on with life.
Yes. And
you're right. He overheard this documentary that Goldie was watching on TV about the Phoenix Lights, and that sparked his memory. And then he ran and had a look at his logbooks, because he like any good pilot, they document every single flight. And he confirmed it. He was flying to Phoenix on the 13th of March, 1997, and he saw the Phoenix Lights.
Yeah, I'm just going to pop this up. I don't know if I can show this, but just a couple of things. We're at the end of our show. And I was actually underneath the Chinese spy balloon when it was shot.
Wow.
Yeah, I just happened to get out of my
How
car
fascinating.
in Myrtle Beach. I don't know if this shows it. I'm going to take a chance here.
Looking at it, Chinese all out, and when it gets over the
And then this is when it was shot.
He does a podcast UFO show.
Yeah, I actually am doing this while they shot the balloon.
it's coming down.
They shot the balloon.
How fascinating.
So
There
I
you
thought I'd
go.
show
You
you
were a first-hand witness to
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
the
the
shoot-down.
BBC actually, I put it on Twitter, and the BBC got a hold of me, and they interviewed me, and
wow.
they did put it. They did publish it. So also,
Well, look, and what I would say on that is, how frustrating is it that the U.S. Department of Defense will be quick to release footage from a U-2 spy plane, Dragon Lady, of the Chinese spy balloon, and it will be quick to release footage of Russian jets dousing MQ-9 Reaper drones with fuel. They'll be quick to release that footage, but they have not yet released any of the visual, photographic or imagery footage of those three unidentified aerial objects that were shot down.
that's right.
What does that tell you? You know?
Yeah, I know those the ones up in Alaska and the Yukon and all that. Very, very strange. Also, we mentioned Ross Coldhart a lot, and I want to say to the public that listen to this show, my favorite podcast is Need to Know with Bryce Zabel and Ross Coldhart. I love that show, and I listen to each one of them. And I think for all those of you that really like this topic, I highly endorse that, and would like for you to check it out. The Need to Know, it's called, and they do such a wonderful job. Those two, really great stuff. So you should be proud. You got your guy from Australia taking this so seriously, and he's such a sharp guy.
100%. I mean, I Need to Know is one of my primary sources of information because, like we were saying off air at the start, you know, with so much that's been happening on this topic over the course of the last few years, it's almost become a full-time job to stay up to date with what's new and what's breaking. And Bryce and Ross, they do such a great job of covering and recapping what's come out, what's breaking, and the implications as well, and what to potentially think is around the corner on the horizon. So, for so many of us, Ross and Bryce serve as a bit of a barometer as to where we are, where we're going on the topic. But I certainly echo your sentiment. Need to Know is a great educational platform, and it's certainly very informing as well.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure. And thank you for all your information, and good luck for your journey along the way here. And I'm sure
I appreciate it.
We'll be having you on back again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Martin, for having me on and having a good fun chat with you and sharing some insights with your viewers. I appreciate the chat.
Excellent. Okay. Take care. I'm so sorry. I just realized that my mic was muted this whole time. So this is, I'm back live again, and thanks for your patience while I was muted. So I have been talking a lot with Mark D'Antonio and a few other people about the jellyfish balloon because so many people have an interest in that. And it's possible that it is this right here, which is actually an Islamic EID celebration balloon. The kind of fits that. I don't think there's anything conclusive yet, though, exactly what that is. It's very interesting. What would really help is if we had footage of this thing actually going into the water, like some of the witnesses that Jeremy Corbell says he has spoken to has talked about, and they actually have that footage supposedly. Now that would really help if we all could see that. And of course, it's definitely a mystery as to what it is. Next week, we have Job Safa on. Don't forget, it's a good show. He's a scientist, will be interesting. And just in a couple of days on Thursday night, we have Michael Schratt joining us on UAP Crossfire. A lot of people really love it. Some people don't like it. It's myself, Chris DiPerno, Don Ecker, and Commander Cobra with 4 of us. We kind of have different points on UFO topics. And again, Michael Schratt on UAP crash retrievals. He was on the show not too long ago, very well received. He will be on that. Also, we have a treat. I've noticed tonight that my friend, very talented musician, Mark Stanley, has been in the chat and joining us. And I've known him for many years, a great guy. I'm going to play one of his songs for the outro here, which is a little something different for us. And I hope you enjoy it. And we'll see you next week. Remember to keep your eyes to the sky.
She's so cool and calm and steady, but she's as close as the nearest star. But I got time until she's ready. I got time, so there you are. When I see her, my heart beats faster, starts beating like a big bass drum. Every time that I walk past her, everything about her says she's the one. Everything about her says she's the one. She's like the sun dancing off the water. She's like the first time that I fell in love. I can't wait to say that I've got her. What I've waited for has finally come. When I see her, my heart beats faster, starts beating like a big bass drum. Every time that I walk past her, everything about her says that she's the one. Everything about her says she's the one. She's the one that makes me forget where I've been before. She's the one I've no regrets, that I've never been loved like this before. When I see her, my heart beats faster, starts beating like a big bass drum. Every time that I walk past her, everything about her says she's the one. Everything about her says she's the one. Everything about her says